Could you let me know your name, the organization that you're with, and what you do?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Dr. Andrew Carter. I'm an assistant professor at San José State University. Most of my research is centered around looking at the role of Black farmers and how Black farmers work to challenge power inequities and also think about their role in supporting broader disparities among Black communities.
Cool. That's amazing. So, what then? I imagine because of what you are doing, this is kind of what brought you to the march today, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So I've been working with Dr. Steele for about 2 years. Actually, our interaction, I was reaching out to Black farmers during COVID in 2021 just to learn generally about their experiences. I ran across Dr. Steele. We had a great, I think it was like a 2-hour conversation. Became so invested in the organization and the work that she's doing that we decided to work collaboratively. And so now I'm going to be writing a book on the history of the organization, putting that in conversation with the broader history of Black women farmers.
Wow. Okay, so this is a topic of Black women farmers and something very familiar. So I'm very excited to
Yeah,
ask you these questions.
yeah.
And so can you talk about what impact Black women farmers make in the agriculture industry and in
Sure.
their communities when they participate in the agriculture industry?
Absolutely, yeah. And so, you think about that historically, Black women have played such a central role to supporting Black sovereignty and community food security efforts. Going back to slavery, you see the stories of Black women putting seeds in their hair, and thinking about going the Middle Passage. Not only going back then, but thinking about in the Civil Rights era, thinking about Fannie Lou Hamer, all these different things historically. Well, Black women have played such a central role in that conversation. Although nowadays, when you look at the current agricultural landscape, Black women farmers Black farmers in general, but Black women farmers specifically have been erased from the modern agricultural landscape. And so what I'm finding in my work is that's not just a census data point and something that, we need to work on if we get around to it. It's erasing Black communities from their connection to the land, to supporting one another, to thinking about conversations about cultural connections to food. I talk a lot about when you go into places like Whole Foods and you think about the role of Black women farmers and Black farmers in general, essentially the foundations of our modern food system, but you're not seeing any of that reflected in general discourse around healthy eating or the connection between food and consumption.
Okay, that actually goes into my next question is there a correlation between Black and particularly Black female agriculture initiatives
Yeah.
and the impact on Black youth in the United States specifically in terms of whether that means through health, through accessible, like in any way, is there really a connection between those?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you can think about that just around like how we've done food policy in this country, right? So dominant food policy has been kind of have this kind of corporate capitalist model of doing food production. In many ways, it's created the modern food deserts that we're seeing, and we like to call it food apartheid because apartheid draws attention to how these aren't natural conditions. Desert can imply it's like a natural condition. These are not natural conditions. They're man-made. They're a result of inequitable policy. And so you think of the role of, again, like I just mentioned, the lack of connection to food, connection to the land. And so when you erase that cultural history, what that does on the ground about folks, and then when we talk about health, is really framed from an individual level perspective. So if you're not eating right, you don't care about your health, you're deviant, you don't care about the communities. And then we kind of impose that on a broader community. And I'm in public health, so a lot of the work that I do looks at interventions. And so when we talk about interventions, a lot of interventions frame marginalized or under-resourced communities from a deficit, right? They're lacking something, lack of education, lack of knowledge, or something there's a lack of that experts from the outside have to come in and fix, right? Or fix the lack there. And so we're seeing here with the example what Dr. Steele's doing, we have experts on the ground in the communities doing the work. They've just been marginalized from their capacity to do the work. And so how do we create a space where we have folks here that are already doing the work, and they just need the space to essentially, support that.
So then, what would that space look like?
Yeah. And so, you can look at it multiple ways. Obviously, we're here. I think the main thing you can think about is policy, right? How do you create sustainable futures to do this work, right? We realize the time intensiveness it's going to take, land resources. And again, historically, these things have been taken away from Black communities. And so how do you create a situation where you can redistribute land, thinking about ways to create more equity as it pertains to that. So I think policy is one way, the primary place you have to have that conversation.
So what impact would policy changes be for Black women if there were policy changes that centered Black women farmers more?
Yeah.
What impact would that make in the agriculture industry?
Sure.
What impact would that make in America as a whole?
Sure. Yeah. Great question. So what I'm seeing a lot in my interviews, so I've been doing work with Dr. Steele's organization. I've interviewed about 30 chapter leaders over my time here in the U.S. and Africa and in the Virgin Islands. And what I'm seeing is even their philosophical orientation of what it means to be a farmer, they're bringing a certain understanding, skill set, know-how that the dominant agricultural framework does not account for. And so if you can infuse that perspective to make it more common or mainstream, what does that look like, right? And so thinking about this from more kind of like a philosophical perspective, what does it look like to not only elevate Black women farmers' perspectives, but to infuse their perspectives into policy all the way down the chain? And then what would that look like in terms of widespread change? So I think it's more than just representation and bringing them into the conversation. How do you create a space where their voices are privileged and centered to do that work? Drawing on their unique skill sets, like I mentioned, their cultural histories, dating back to slavery, right? And so how do you bring all that forward to currently what we're talking about in the modern agricultural landscape?
And what would that be? What are, can you give, like, and we'll close the interview with this, what are like specific examples of like bringing our cultural experiences into the space, or anything that comes to mind from what you just said?
Even something as simple as food for profit versus food for the community, or the right to food, right? Thinking of reframing our conversations around food as a right to food versus farming is capital, or farming is a way to make money, right? How do we reframe? How do we create policy legislation? How do we create conditions where everyone has equal right to healthy food? And then if we want to have those individual level conversations around not eating right and you don't care, once those conditions are created, we can have an honest discussion. But until then, we can't have a legitimate discussion about that.
Was there anything else you'd like to say to close out the interview?
No, I'm just humbled to be here. This is Dr. Steele's been talking about this for a few years. Glad to be here on the ground and show my support any way I can.
And actually, you just gave me one question. What's your reflection on the march so far?
It's been great. I'm looking to see, when we did the different locations and see where it ends up. But yeah, love to see the turnout. Everyone's got their pink on. It's been great so far.
It's been cool, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.